In 1995, Michael Mann's Heat brought audiences one of the greatest crime dramas ever made. The cat-and-mouse duel between Robert De Niro's master thief and Al Pacino's relentless detective has become legendary. But what most people don't know is that Heat wasn't just fiction. It was based on a very real game of cops and robbers in Chicago during the 1960s between a career criminal named Neil McCauley and the detective named Chuck Adamson, determined to bring him down. Health Wealth Diary presents the true story that inspired Heat, the lives of Adamson and McCauley, the crew that terrorized Chicago, the one fateful diner meeting that really happened, and the final gunfight that ended it all. This is the real story behind the movie Heat. To understand this story, we have to start with the city itself, Chicago. By the 1960s, Chicago was a city of contrasts. The skyscrapers along Lake Michigan told a story of industry and progress, but underneath, crime ran deep. Police corruption was everywhere, and for a smart enough criminal, the city was their playground. But Chicago also bred tough, streetwise cops who weren't afraid to go head-to-head with the worst of them. Chuck Adamson was one of those cops. Neil McCauley was one of those criminals. Their collision was inevitable. Neil McCauley was born in Polk, Iowa, on February 2, 1914. He grew up poor and turned to crime early. He spent over 25 years in prison, including 8 years in Alcatraz. This is where McCauley perfected his craft, studying security systems, planning techniques, and military-style discipline. McCauley was paroled in 1962 and immediately went back into crime, this time as a highly disciplined thief. His rules: no attachments, no drugs, no sloppy crew members. He was the archetype of a professional thief. He was the real deal: no alcohol, no women slowing him down, no mistakes. To him, crime was a business, and he ran his crew like a corporation. He was the prototype of Robert De Niro's character in Heat. But unlike a Hollywood movie, this was real life. Chuck Adamson was born in 1936 in Chicago. He grew up in a working-class neighborhood. After high school, Adamson joined the U.S. Army, then returned to join the Chicago Police Department in 1958. He developed a reputation as a sharp, dedicated cop who studied criminals carefully. Adamson worked in Robbery-Homicide Division, specializing in organized crime and major heists. Adamson wasn't just a cop with a badge. He had a mind like a chess player. He didn't simply chase criminals, he studied them. He watched their patterns, their methods, their discipline. This attention to detail would lead him straight to a man named Neil McCauley. After his release in 1962, McCauley assembled a crew of like-minded professionals that he met inside the joint. Specialized in burglaries and armed robberies, they targeted grocery stores, warehouses, and armored trucks. They used police scanners and counter-surveillance techniques, which was advanced for the 1960s. McCauley's crew wasn't flashy. They weren't the kind to flaunt money or party in nightclubs. They were quiet, methodical, and extremely dangerous. And their success put them directly in Adamson's sights. In 1963, McCauley robbed a manufacturing plant of its diamond drill bits. Adamson got the call, and the chase was on. Adamson would later infiltrate McCauley by placing a confidential informant inside his crew. Soon, the confidential informant would pay off when Adamson got wind that McCauley had gathered a team of criminal associates to burglarize a department store in Chicago. On the night of the burglary, Adamson's police radio crackled. McCauley and his crew had arrived. Officers watched as the men entered the rear of the building and descended into a basement where they waited and listened. McCauley heard footsteps above and made his crew abort the entire operation. He had too many years of criminal experience to know that strange sounds in a seemingly empty department store is a no-go. McCauley now knew the police were on to him. For Adamson, he now knew he was dealing with a different type of criminal. The confidential informant in Macaulay's crew was similar to the character Waingro from the movie. After the crew found out that they had a snitch in their operation, the body of a man was found gruesomely murdered months after, right by the border of Mexico and Texas. He was tortured and nailed to a wall. John Voight's character, Nate the Fence, was based on former bank robber from Los Angeles turned writer Edward Bunker. Bunker also served as a consultant to Michael Mann for the film. And finally, the coolest character in the movie, besides Macaulay, of course, Val Kilmer's character, Chris Schuylerus, who was based on real-life criminal Miklos Polesti, who was also part of Macaulay's gang. Finishing up the rest of Macaulay's crew is Michael Chirito, played by the late Tom Sizemore, and inspired from real-life crew member Michael Perrille. Donald Breeden, who was played by Dennis Haysbert, was inspired by crew member Russell Britton. By the way, who is your favorite character from Heat? Let us know in the comments. Adamson admired Macaulay, not as a friend, not as a hero, but as a professional. He knew Macaulay wasn't like other thieves. And in some ways, Macaulay admired Adamson too. Theirs was a game of mutual recognition, each one seeing himself reflected in the other. One day, as Adamson was dropping off his dry cleaning at a little shopping center in Chicago on Lincoln Avenue, he saw Macaulay, who he had already been surveilling, getting out of his car. Apparently, Macaulay knew Adamson was on his trail and recognized the detective upon first sight. Adamson approached Macaulay and simply said, "Come on, I'll buy you a cup of coffee."
If I didn't know who he was and know as much about him as I did, then, I would have probably thought that, he's probably a halfway decent guy.
The two sat across from each other inside a diner, discussing life, crime, and inevitability. Adamson later recalled that he told Macaulay, "I know what you're doing, and you know I'll do everything I can to stop you." "Why don't you go somewhere else and cause trouble?" Adamson asked. Macaulay responds with, "I like Chicago." This moment, two men, one cop and one criminal, meeting in a diner, was so powerful that Michael Mann recreated it word for word in Heat. It wasn't just a conversation, it was fate acknowledging itself. Chuck Adamson met Neil McCauley again on Wednesday, March 25th, 1964. Adamson and his team had a tip that Macaulay's crew was about to rob an armored truck headed to the National Tea Company store on South Cicero Avenue. Once the cash had been deposited from the armored truck, Macaulay and two others entered the store, leaving their wheelman in the car. From his vantage point across the street, Adamson could see into the supermarket, beyond the window advertisements. Customers and staff had their hands in the air. He told his officers to hold their fire, fearing a bloodbath.
So we knew that it was going down at that time. And then we didn't try to go in. There were too many people inside. It would have been awful.
Macaulay exited with $13,000, which in today's world is estimated around $100,000. As Macaulay and his crew ran out of the store, he spotted the Heat. Adamson and his partner approached with their guns drawn. Macaulay and the three others fled on foot, firing at officers before taking off toward a row of adjacent houses. Two of them were immediately shot and killed. Another, Miklos Polesti, escaped injured, only to be arrested later on that day. Adamson pursued Macaulay, tracking him between the gangways of the nearby residential homes, those narrow gaps granting access between individual houses. Chuck Adamson didn't hesitate. He shot Macaulay 6 times, killing him on the spot.
Was where we finished him.
In the movie Heat, Robert De Niro's character and his crew rob a bank in downtown Los Angeles, coming out with over $12 million. It's an amazing sequence, one that inspired the infamous North Hollywood shootout, except it's entirely fictional. In reality, the real Neil McCauley went down robbing a supermarket in Chicago for a measly $13,000. We probably don't even have to explain why a grocery store robbery isn't quite as exciting as a bank heist. Nonetheless, Macaulay was the real deal. In 1981, Adamson served as a technical consultant and acted in Michael Mann's first movie, Thief. Michael Mann and Adamson would remain close friends after the project. He also was a technical advisor and acted in Beverly Hills Cop. Then he created Mann's other series, Crime Story. Adamson also wrote many episodes of Miami Vice before his final appearance as a technical advisor in Heat. Charles Chuck Adamson died of lung cancer on February 22, 2008, in Roseburg, Oregon, at the age of 71. Heat became more than a film. It became a myth. But at its heart, it was a true story. A story of a cop and a criminal. Two men who could have been friends in another life, but in this one were destined to be enemies. The story of Chuck Adamson and Neil McCauley is more than cops and robbers. It's about two men cut from the same cloth, but standing on opposite sides of the law. Adamson lived long enough to see their story immortalized in film. Macaulay's name lives only in whispers, remembered through Heat. So we'll leave you with this question. If Macaulay had walked away from that final job, could he have ever escaped his fate? Or was he destined to meet Adamson from the very beginning? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, smash that like button and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notifications for more awesome videos from the Health Wealth Diary.